in the absence of any declaration of war, are military attacks on ships suspected of drug trafficking lawful or constitutional?
I don't think I can offer an opinion on that.
And let me ask you all, share with me, if you would, your views on nationwide injunctions.
I think it's a very developing area of the law after Trump versus CASA and that decision. But typically, injunctions and temporary restraining orders are constrained by Federal Rule of Civil Procedure 65. And the courts have, along with that rule, basically considered four important factors as to whether or not an injunction or a temporary restraining order should be issued.
I'm sure the nominees were ecstatic about that. Let me just, while we're on this topic, I want to stay on the topic of nationwide injunctions for just a second. Let me just ask you this. If a district court were to recharacterize the injunction and say, well, it's not an injunction per se, it's a temporary restraining order, and therefore the CASA case doesn't really apply, therefore, it's a whole different set of analysis. Is it your understanding that you could do that? In other words, is the temporary restraining order a get-out-of-jail-free card? Is that a completely different set of circumstances, a completely different set of analyses? What's your understanding of how you can use TROs and how the CASA case relates to TROs? Let's start again with you, Mr. Foltz.
No, I believe it's the same analysis and the same factors. The one that I was just about to get to before is the balance of equities. And I think that's where the CASA decision makes a direct impact on the factors for both a temporary restraining order and for a nationwide injunction.
Senator, I think the analysis would be the same. They're both equitable remedies.
It's the same analysis, Senator.
Okay. Senator Schiff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If you could give me one more moment.
Yeah. We won't take it off your 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Ganjei, you worked for Professor and former Deputy Assistant Attorney General John Yoo. And I wanted to ask you, he recently wrote an op-ed in the Washington Post concerning the military strikes on shipping and raised an issue as to whether that was lawful. And let me ask you your thoughts as a legal and a constitutional matter. In the absence of congressional authorization to use force, in the absence of any declaration of war, are military attacks on ships suspected of drug trafficking lawful or constitutional?
Senator, I think that's a highly fact-specific situation, and if there were such strikes and there were going to be challenged in court, there is a likelihood that it could come before me if I'm fortunate enough to be confirmed, so I don't think I can offer an opinion on that.
Well, can you offer an opinion on whether you believe that the War Powers Act is constitutional?
Senator, again, that might be something that comes before me as well.
I would imagine any number of legal issues could come before you. That doesn't preclude you from expressing your legal views on the subject, particularly something as broad as the constitutionality of legislation like the War Powers Act.
Senator, my answer is the same.
And let me ask you all, share with me, if you would, your views on nationwide injunctions. And we can go down the line.
I think it's a very developing area of the law after Trump versus CASA and that decision. But typically, injunctions and temporary restraining orders are constrained by Federal Rule of Civil Procedure 65. And the courts have, along with that rule, basically considered four important factors as to whether or not an injunction or a temporary restraining order should be issued, which I've already stated. But one of them is the likelihood of a party being successful on that injunction in trial eventually, the balance of equities between issuing the injunction and not, the possibility of irreparable harm, and then, of course, the public interest in issuing that injunction. With it being a developing area of the law, it would be a very cautious analysis, but it would include those factors and the factors enumerated by the court in Trump versus CASA.
So you wouldn't categorically rule out the potential applicability of a nationwide injunction?
I think that we have to examine closely CASA, and the key would be the balance of equities and whether or not that Supreme Court decision constrains the application of those four factors with a nationwide injunction, and it would appear on its face that it would. And I think with it being a very developing area of the law, it's going to be a fact-specific and case-specific analysis that goes into those factors.
Care to respond?
Senator, I agree with much of my colleagues' statement. I would say post-CASA, you would look to see what is needed to give the parties before you full and equitable relief. But generally, the Supreme Court has cautioned against courts having the ability to bind parties not before it.
And I agree with both of my colleagues, Senator.
If we could go down the line also, do you believe that the Congress has the power to legislate an enforceable code of ethics on the Supreme Court?
I think I would probably need more facts and circumstances to be able to answer that question fully, but certainly if Congress were to pass a law, it would be subject to all the same scrutiny requirements from any other piece of legislation.
Well, can you do a little better than that?
I think that Congress certainly has the authority under the law to issue laws and to vote on laws and to pass statutes, and certainly that would be one that Congress has the authority to do. Whether it would withstand constitutional scrutiny, I would have to have more facts and circumstances to be able to make a complete analysis of that subject.
Senator, I also would like to have more facts before rendering an opinion on that. But I would obviously be very attuned to the separation of powers concerns that something like that would raise.
Senator, again, I agree with my colleagues. I was only going to add the potential separation of powers concern, but Mr. Ganjei did that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. In the absence of any declaration of war, are military attacks on ships suspected of drug trafficking lawful or constitutional?
I don't think I can offer an opinion on that.
And let me ask you all, share with me, if you would, your views on nationwide injunctions.
I think it's a very developing area of the law after Trump versus CASA and that decision. But typically, injunctions and temporary restraining orders are constrained by Federal Rule of Civil Procedure 65. And the courts have, along with that rule, basically considered four important factors as to whether or not an injunction or a temporary restraining order should be issued.